For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates.
This is StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh, Revi, and you're watching Talking Point. Welcoming from Moscow, Dr. Anna Kireeva. She's an associate professor and a resident fellow at the Moscow State Institute of International Relations, MGIMO. Добрый вечер, профессор Kireeva. Очень приятно с вами встретить и спасибо за ваше время.
Good evening, thank you.
Good evening. Sorry for my broken Russian there. I won't try it on you, I'm sure
It was
yours
perfect.
will be much better. Ambassador Asoke Mukerji joining us from the capital. He served in all the ex-Soviet Central Asian republics. He opened countries now. He opened India's embassies there and retired in 2015, if I'm not mistaken, as India's permanent representative and ambassador to the United Nations. Welcome again to StratNews Global, Ambassador.
Thank you, Amitabh, and good evening, Dr. Kireeva. Nice to meet you.
Dr. Kireeva, when you're looking at the Vladimir Putin and Joe Biden summit in Geneva, how is it being seen in Moscow? Among government circles, security analysts like you, and even among the common person?
There were no illusions about the summit prior to the summit when it took place. So most people, common people, and also the elite, the strategic community, there were no high hopes for the summit. So consequently, as there were no hopes that the countries will somehow really manage fundamental differences, everything that anyone could hope for was that it could be a normal engagement that we haven't had for several years already, and that was pretty much it. So I think most people are neutral or optimistic, and the general election could put a new start to somehow managing the situation and also would start a kind of a new start for some settlement in areas where the interest of the two. Overall, the reaction is pretty much okay, but there have been no breakthroughs. Actually, no breakthroughs could ever be expected.
When you say START, of course, START also is the acronym for those strategic talks. Ambassador, the bar was set purposely very low by both sides, I think. But the takeaways in terms of the positives that you see, including the resumption, or not resumption, but at least the ambassadors or the envoys going back to the respective capitals, you have a take on that?
Yes, Amitabh, I think that you're right. As Dr. Andreeva said, the expectations were consciously set at a low level, which reflects the kind of challenges that the relationship between these two nuclear weapons powers faces today. But I think that at least three takeaways which have a lot of potential on international relations, apart from their bilateral relationship. The first is the joint agreement and statement on strategic stability. So that's a joint document which has been issued at the level of the presidents, and I think that's a very good beginning. It has a 3-year framework, 2024, in which to work out the strategic stability on issues like nuclear weapons and weapons in outer space and so on. The second takeaway, which I think has an impact on the rest of the world, including on us in India, is the agreement to work and have a dialogue on cybersecurity. This is very important because India is dependent on digital India and the cyber technologies for her own development. So if we can have a contribution to cybersecurity between two major powers, I think it will help India. And the third area, which has not been spoken of too much, but which I think is important for us in looking to the future, is the discussions on the Arctic. And I recall in this context the outcome of the Vladivostok summit, where both Russia and India agreed to cooperate on the Arctic, and India was invited to participate in the development of the Arctic. And India is a member of India is an observer of the Arctic Council. Observer of the Arctic Council. But I think that the discussions between the United States and Russia on the Arctic have a great potential for countries like India, who are keen to partner in new areas and explore, to add new dimensions to our strategic relationship. Thank you.
Dr. Kireeva, when we talk about cybersecurity, I mean, both presidents had separate press conferences, unlike what happened in Helsinki with then President Trump. Cybersecurity, President Biden was talking about how he told President Putin that, what happens if your oil pipelines are hit. There seems to be, as the ambassador is pointing out, some agreement on that, to move forward at least. Dr. Kireeva, can you hear us?
Yeah, cybersecurity. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Cybersecurity is a very important issue, and actually, Russia proposed a dialogue on security after the 2016 elections, and after there were accusations that Russia helped to kind of elect Trump in the what is really seen in Russia and officially as allegations on Russia's involvement in the elections. However, from what we can see, the Americans was not to engage with Russia on cybersecurity, because mainly Russia was seen as a cybersecurity threat in itself. And with Russia becoming a domestic political issue in the United States, this dialogue was kind of virtually impossible. However, we have definitely witnessed the evolution of such approach, and the two countries agreed to try at least to establish a working group on cybersecurity. And this is very important in many regards. On the one hand, the recent attacks on the American cybersecurity, Colonial Pipeline and others, they might be carried out by hacker groups, and it's very important for both states to find some common approaches how to deal with transnational crime, which actually is not in the interest of the state. And the second issue, which is also important, is something like defining the red lines, where the red lines are in cybersecurity. So defining the red lines in cybersecurity is extremely important, because this is the domain where the two countries can actually enter a very military engagement very quickly, and it's a vital area for the security of both states. So unfortunately, even establishing such established, even if there, it is kind of to say actually agree on some specific issues in the next couple of years. But even having the dialogue and understanding what is the critical infrastructure that the two countries should not target, and what are the rules of the engagement, what could be the rules of the engagement, that's very important for the stability of both states and for the world as well.
Sure. I'm just going to take a question here, Ambassador, from Pratima Kore. Would the recent summit result in a thaw in relations, considering that the U.S. still considers Russia as a major adversary and imposes sanctions even on ally countries for dealing with Russia? Now, here we're also looking at Katsa and the S-400s, right? So how does that dynamic play out while America and Russia talk?
Well, I think the starting point is that they are in a dialogue at a state-to-state level. The dialogue is going to be anchored by the ministries of foreign affairs of the two sides. That has been already announced, at least President Putin announced it in one of his press conferences. And I think that since both countries are permanent members of the UN Security Council, a part of the answer to the question you've asked lies in the way in which Russia and the United States have actually dealt with each other after the Biden administration has taken office. And I can give you just the latest example is in the month of May, for almost 2 weeks, the Security Council was considering the breakdown of peace and security in Jerusalem and in Gaza. But it was the efforts of Russia and the United States as part of the quartet, because the quartet is Russia, United States, European Union, and the United Nations. So they are the ones who brokered the compromise outcome, which enabled China to table a press statement on the 22nd of May. So I think that Russia and the United States, as members of the Security Council, are now demonstrating that they are willing to work together on a low key. And I think that's the important point. It's not going to be a headline grabbing cooperation, but a low key cooperation. And how that will impact on unilateral sanctions imposed by a permanent member on another member state of the United Nations, I think that this discussion has to start again, because I think both, the way I see it is, we read the tea leaves in this business. And at the end of May, a very interesting but a very esoteric report was adopted by the United Nations group of experts on cybersecurity. But two things were important in that report. One was that it was a unanimous report. So there was no confrontation in adopting the report, unlike in 2017. And the second thing was that in the report, the way forward identified by this group of experts to deal with issues of cyber attacks and who is attacking whom was preferred. They preferred to deal with it through discussions and negotiations under Article 33 of the Charter, rather than in 2017, the big powers had tried to resort to Article 51, which is self-defense, and then justify what you're doing. So I think that these are very small indicators, but the indicators are now there for those of us who want to see them, that gradually things are going to be addressed on the basis of a cooperative dialogue. I think that's how I see it.
Cooperative dialogue. Dr. Kireeva, if you want to elaborate on the S-400s and the Katsa, which could be imposed by the Americans, but also the fact that Joe Biden came to Geneva after he had a G7 summit, a NATO summit, and then an EU summit. So he's clearly making a statement vis-a-vis Russia.
Thank you. I'll jump in and also provide a small perspective on what it could mean. It could mean if there could be a flaw in Russia-U.S. relations. So actually, if we look past several, you see that the confrontation and that the Strategic Commission were moving in uncontrolled direction. The relations were only worse and worse without any signs of improvement. And even the diplomatic staff and the embassies suffered, providing very limited capacity, more limited than for the two countries engaged, had negative impact on the relationship. So countries are in a confrontation, or especially in a military confrontation, for example, Ukraine, or broad conflict between NATO and Russia, of Russia and the United States. So we could probably see it more as the attempts to manage this, manage strategic competition. Sure, there are a lot of issues, and we can name Russia relations, which are also now at very low level. We can also think about the Ukrainian crisis. We can also look at the issue of the human rights, and look at the issue of the Belarus that has recently emerged. And of course, especially on the core issues, Russia and the U.S. are not going to have any agreement anytime soon. There are fundamental differences, but we can kind of manage confrontation and at least some select aid. managed engagement. If the two countries form kind of working groups and a normal bottom-up approach, bottom-up dialogue, and if these channels of dialogue and communication are really established. Even President Biden himself said that kind of let's wait for half a year or maybe to have any progress. And of course, the sanctions are not going to appear anytime soon. There are two different kinds of sanctions. The one are imposed by the executive body and by the president himself, the executive branch. And the others actually imposed by the Congress, like Katsa, which is a law. So this is not something that can be abolished or unilaterally taken out by the president himself. So it's not going to disappear anytime soon. And probably the issue is if we look at S-400, if India is given a waiver or not. However, if we look at the developments, as far as I have seen, the contract is underway, and but is going to be sent by the end of this year. And actually, Russian specialists have already started training the Indian specialists in Russia, how to, the military specialists. So it's probably going to be realized anyway. And taking into consideration that strategic competition with China is now the top priority of the American administration, and the United States needs India as a very important security partner in dealing with China in the Indo-Pacific. So here, I would suppose that the United States probably would not go too harsh on India in order not to alienate India and continue the engagement under the framework of Quad and bilateral U.S.-India relations.
A managed confrontation, you said, between the U.S. and Russia. Ambassador, the last point that Dr. Kireeva is bringing up, how does that dynamic work? Because individually, or bilaterally rather, Russia and China have a strategic partnership. India and the U.S. Are moving closer together in a partnership, not an alliance. So how does the dynamic that's brought up through Geneva actually factor into the other two bilateral partnerships?
Well, I think that as I see it, we have strategic partnerships.
China is not going to want a warming up of relations between Russia and U.S.
Well, China may or may not, but I think that what is sitting in India, what we need to look at is that we have a strategic partnership with both the United States and with Russia. And the outcome of these strategic partnerships have been visible to us in India in different ways. They do not, in a sense, contradict each other. In a sense, they actually merge. If you look at the big ticket item of the India-U.S. Strategic partnership was the nuclear deal. But the biggest beneficiary of the nuclear deal in India is Russia, which has built the most number of nuclear power plants. So I think that this is the way that I would look at it, that this is not going to be binary. It is going to depend on the specifics of the strategic partnership. Now, what is the objective of our strategic partner vis-a-vis our region is an important question. And in our region, China is probably the biggest issue in Asia today for all her neighbors and so on. So I think it's in that context that we need to see how the Geneva summit will impact on our region and on China. Dialogue between two of the biggest nuclear powers in the world will have an impact on China. And China will have to rethink the implications of this joint statement on strategic stability for its own interests, because China has its own interests in these areas as well, and it's developing those interests in new technologies and so on. And therefore, I think that directly in our region, one outcome of the Geneva summit, granted that it was set at a very low level, is unfortunate that neither the United States nor Russia probably will make much headway in addressing issues in our region, especially Afghanistan. This is something that I think we need to be cognizant of. On Afghanistan, there is a convergence between the 5 permanent members since June 2011, in which all 5 of them have agreed to bring the Taliban back into the political structures of Afghanistan following the withdrawal of the international troops. And I think in that we are really on our own. And therefore, the Geneva summit would not make a big difference on that issue.
We're just putting out some of those tweets relating to Afghanistan there. But since the ambassador was talking about China and the region, I do believe you've done a lot of work, Dr. Kireeva, on the region in terms of the Indo-Pacific. India has been trying to get Russia into the Indian vision of the Indo-Pacific, not the U.S. vision of that. How do you see that developing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's a great question. As for now, the reaction by Russia's Minister of Foreign Affairs has been largely negative, as the ambassador probably knows much better than I do. If we look at why, you can clearly see that Russia is mostly noticing the American antagonistic strategy towards China and looks at the strategy as very anti-Chinese in nature, aiming to contain China. And for Russia, that's impossible to join any strategy or any vision that explicitly targets China in such an adversary or in such an antagonistic way. However, if we look at kind of practical what has been happening practically in the region, we can clearly see that for Russia, strategic partnership with India is also very important. And I mean, in kind of practical terms, we could look at this in October 2019 when he said that Russia would not actually work against any multilateral engagements or unilateral formats that could enhance the security, not supporting the strategic competition or creating the Indo-Pacific as a competitive space, but rather working on how to mitigate the issues and how to establish practical economic cooperation. And as Ambassador mentioned, it was very important that Prime Minister Modi visited the Far East and the Eastern Economic Forum in Vladivostok in September 2019, and also proposed how to bridge the Russian Far East, the Arctic, and the Indo-Pacific, the Indians' vision of the Indo-Pacific. And for sure, Russia would welcome the visions by India and also by ASEAN, I mean, of the region that are inclusive in nature, that are not dividing or excluding some powers. And here, I think in practice, there is a potential for cooperation between Russia and India. And Vladivostok-Chennai trade route, maritime trade route, is something that the two countries really need to explore, and also attracting more investment. I mean, just kind of a two-way road. So the Indian investment to the Far East and also the Russian investment into India is something that we really need to upgrade our economic relations that have been behind the political and security relations. And also the Arctic, which India has a lot of interest in, I think is a very important area of potential engagement, and it also connected with this. And also there is some potential for trilateral cooperation with Japan, which is also interested in engaging Russia and bringing Russia into these dynamics as a kind of a non-confrontational actor. So, however, probably Russia would not really agree to something like the Indo-Pacific in the nearest future, but it doesn't matter that we cannot practically cooperate. So establishing economic and security cooperation in practice is very important, especially has a decision taken to establish a naval base in Sudan. So we really need more of Russia's presence in the ocean. This could also be in sea and security lanes, preserving peace and stability in the Indian Ocean and also in the Pacific Ocean.
Ambassador, your thoughts on the Indo-Pacific and how Russia comes into that, and also a question on the Arctic, because that was also discussed between Biden and Putin.
Well, I think on the Arctic, the fact that this was discussed and that this is one of the areas of future dialogue, if not cooperation, at least dialogue, is important. And from the Indian perspective, I think we always look at the framework of such dialogues. And in the case of the Arctic, the framework is the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. So it is based on a rule of law to which countries who have ratified that convention are committed. And I think Russia and India have a firm basis for cooperation on the basis of this rule of law in the Arctic. And so too is it the case in the Indian and Pacific Oceans. I agree with Dr. Kireeva that we have a divergence in terms of the nomenclature of whether it's the Asia Pacific or the Indo-Pacific. But if you look at it on the ground, India's definition of this space is the entire Indian and Pacific Oceans. And so too is Japan's definition of the Indo-Pacific, the entire Indian and Pacific Oceans. And that gives us that holistic space and underpinned by the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which enables cooperation on the ground. So that's one part of it. And I think it's important for us, like I gave the example of the nuclear energy sector, to also look at cooperation between India and Russia in the economic area and see how that in the maritime domain and see how that is complemented or challenged by other major powers in the world. Because a very important component of India's policy on the Indian Ocean, which is known as SAGAR, or Security and Growth for All in the region, is the development of a blue economy, which will be the mainstay of India's economic growth in this century. So it's the first time we are entering into the maritime domain in a strategic sense. And for us, partnership with Russia, which is a maritime power, is important because we have collaboration in shipbuilding and naval operations. And finally, I'd like to point out that even under the United Nations rubric, if you look at cooperation on the ground and the point that Dr. Kireeva made, we have cooperated with ships of India, ships of Russia, ships of the United States, and I would also add ships of China in combating piracy off the coast of Somalia. Yeah. That has been one of the major successes of joint cooperation in maritime security. And the economic impact on India is something that we must talk about all the time, because when that threat was going on, the cost of doing business with India was increasing very rapidly. But the moment we were able to push this threat back towards the coast of Somalia, the cost of doing business with India of all our international partners dropped and became more viable. So I think that this is something that is of direct interest to us. Thank you.
Right, Ambassador Mukerji, I mean, we could go on talking about India, China, Russia, U.S. and global affairs, but thank you so much for joining us with your experience and your expertise, Ambassador.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And Dr. Kireeva, спасибо большое, очень приятно было, even if it is just online. Thank you for your time. Спасибо за ваше время.
Thank you for having me.
It was our pleasure. And just a reminder to our viewers to follow our social media handles, whether it's on YouTube or Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, for the latest news and analysis from an Indian perspective. Do subscribe to our YouTube channel and help support us financially. There's a link in the descriptor of this video. You've been watching Talking Point on StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh.